Good afternoon, everyone. It is May 28th, 2 p.m. I've called a special meeting to receive updates from the city manager regarding COVID-19. The governor's executive order issued on March 12, 2020 has authorized the use of remote participation at meetings of the city's public bodies in response to the threat posed to the public by the COVID-19 virus and has issued guidelines for the city's use of remote participation. In order to watch the meeting, please tune into Channel 22 or visit the open meeting portal at the city's website. We will now do a roll call. Mr. Clerk.
Councillor Carlone.
Present.
Present. Vice Mayor Mallon.
Present.
Present. Councillor McGovern.
Present.
Present. Councillor Nolan.
Present.
Present. Councillor Simmons. Councillor Simmons. Absent. Councillor Sabrina Wheeler.
Present.
Present. Councillor Toomey. Present. Councillor Zondervan.
Present.
Present. Mayor Siddiqui.
Present.
8 members present.
So we will now proceed to the city manager and his team.
Good afternoon, everybody. And we'll follow the same format we have in the past. I'll give a quick overview, and then we're going to have a couple of people make presentations. So today I have making presentations Joe Barr. He's the Assistant Director of Traffic and Parking. Matt Nelson will make a presentation from the podium, and Commissioner Bard is here, and Claude Jacobs will be on the phone, all giving COVID-19 updates. Like in previous weeks, I'd just like to give you a couple of brief remarks on where we are in certain topics. So the city is continuing to monitor Governor Baker's reopening strategy to ensure that we fully in line with the Commonwealth's plan. To help our community, we have established a reopening website that has links to all guidance documents, Cambridge-specific requirements, and the contact information for city staff that is assigned to answer questions about each sector. We really felt that was important due to the fact there's often concerns on who the right person is to go when you're interpreting these items. We have been meeting with the business community and faith community regularly. Additionally, we sent out letters with all the information on the governor's order to places of worship, manufacturers, business office, hair salons, and barbershops. And we continue to be proactive to reach out and help educate the public about the reopening process. On Monday night, we'll be providing the council with an overview of the city's plan for reopening our buildings and to have additional employees to the public. We are continuing to make needed fiscal changes in our public service areas and developing policies that will be needed to make sure that when the buildings open, it meets all the guidelines for both our employees and when we're open to the residents and business of the city. Since its opening on April 13th, the War Memorial Temporary Emergency Shelter has been a success. The success is attributed in an incredible effort of the broad team that was put together on the planning and construction of this shelter that has been operating daily. I want to thank everyone involved for the War Memorial operation, but I especially want to thank the neighborhood, who has really been supportive in this process. As you know, the shelter had 3 service areas. The day shelter in the field house will continue to operate, but the quarantine area is being phased out this week and will close on Friday, and the isolation area, which we did not have to use, is currently being removed. This, and Claude will give a more update on this. This week's emergency order requirement, the use of face covering, has been amended slightly to allow employees in places of business to remove their mask or cloth face coverings in circumstances where a distance of at least 6 feet from others will be maintained at all times, such as when working alone in an office room, workstation, or other location. All places of business are required to post signage at entrance of the building informing the public the masks or cloth face coverings must be worn at all times within or about the premise. All other aspects of the order remain in effect as the same. We are continuing our senior outreach, and we have now reached seniors ages 65 to 69. We have made over 1,000 calls, and to date have registered and discussed over 8,000 seniors on issues concerns. The Port Neighborhood Testing Program and the Cambridge Housing Authority Senior Testing Program has been incredibly successful. I want to thank the Public Health Department for really coordinating this, the Broad Institute for selling us the kits, Pro EMS for testing the kits, and of course MIT for making a $250,000 contribution towards the kits. And I also want to thank the Cambridge Fire Department, who played a major role in all the testing of the Cambridge Senior Housing Project. So it's been a very successful program, and really, unlike pretty much any city, we have put our own tax dollars and resources into these programs. I also want to remind everybody that the Cambridge Health Alliance continues the test site in East Cambridge. This has also been a very successful project, and again, I will just give out the number, 617-665-2928. You must have an appointment in order to be tested, and it's for all Cambridge residents. And then, of course, last week was the first day of the Riverbend/closure of Memorial Drive. I was down there along with the police commissioner and the public health commissioner. It was a very successful opening. And we'll continue to monitor the program again this week and then evaluate moving forward whether we will continue Sundays or consider additional days for this program while working with DCR. And I also want to report that so far the golf course has also been working closely with the governor guideline, and it's been a very successful progress in terms of being open. I want to thank our residents again for all their hard work in complying with the guidelines. I can tell you that at the Memorial Drive closing at Riverbend Park, the Commissioner, Claude, and myself were all talking about how many people had masks on, and it was just really good to see, and I think we've done a really good job, especially the police department in terms of giving out masks, in the Public Health Department and Lee Giannetti making people aware of that in the council. So I think all our hard work around the importance of masks was clearly shown on Sunday as well. So at that point, I will now turn it over to Commissioner Bard, who will give his weekly update.
Through you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Manager. I'll be very brief. We continue to issue masks, and to date, we've issued 0 fines or warnings. The shelter operations continue to run smoothly. There are approximately 81 individuals who are approved for occupancy at the temporary shelter at the War Memorial. There have been as many as 65 individuals spending any one night there. During the past week, a little bit of turbulence. 3 individuals were banned or removed from the shelter for rules violations. One individual because he was arrested by members of my department for package theft in the surrounding area. We were able to return the items to their rightful owner. One for pushing a staff member and another for other rules violations. There's a grievance process and procedure in place for those individuals to seek redress. I believe it has been disseminated to members of the council, and that really concludes my updates. Things continue to run smooth. As the manager mentioned, the Memorial Drive Riverbend Park was a great example of voluntary compliance. No issues to speak of. So that concludes my update.
Thank you, Commissioner. So now we're going to have a presentation made by Joe Barr. We have heard from the council the importance of shared streets. Joe has been working on this for about a month. We felt it was important to bring to the council where we are. I think we're in a good place. I think we'll get a lot to offer. It'll be coming soon. But rather than me announcing that, I'll let Joe get into the details. But I thank the council for their patience. I thank Joe for all his work on this, and I think we're going to have a very good plan very soon. So I'm going to turn it over to Joe.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. So the members of the council should have in their email inboxes a handout, and the folks in the chamber should have copies as well, and we'll make sure to make this available online in the near future so folks can review it separately. But I'm just going to walk through this basically and start with kind of what we've done already, what we think we can do in the relatively near future, and then what we think might come after that. And I'm certainly looking as much as possible for feedback from the members of the City Council, both on the ideas that we're proposing, but also in terms of ways to get the word out. Because I think one of the central challenges that many cities around the country have faced, and we certainly are sensitive to, in this moment is our ability to do outreach. And as we're making changes to our streets, even if they're temporary or very simple to implement, we want to make sure that folks know they're coming and have an opportunity to provide some level of feedback, particularly on how we expand these programs going forward. So in terms of what we've already done, I think most folks are probably somewhat familiar with this, but I'll just say, in response to requests from restaurants, we've installed more than a dozen pickup zones for takeout and delivery operations for those restaurants in coordination with the business associations. And we're continuing to accept those requests and implement those as we get them. We've been in touch through the Small Business Advisory Committee as well as through other means to get the word out about those. So those I think have worked pretty well, and we're looking at additional signage that can help promote local restaurants as part of that. Fairly early on in this crisis, we converted any traffic signals that operated using a push button, which most of ours don't anyway, but about a third of them do, to operate automatically so that people didn't have to physically touch the button. I think we're really a leader in making that change, and we're actually going to look and see how many of those we don't have to convert back in the future, so we can keep them on an automatic operation going forward, which is better for pedestrians and for safety. And then, as the manager and the police commissioner mentioned, the Memorial Drive closure this past weekend, it was a success, and we'll obviously continue to monitor that and see where that goes. But that's a good example of a partnership with the state and how we can make these things work better for the community. I guess before I go into the sort of what's coming soon proposals, I did want to say that in all of the planning we've done for this, we've been extremely sensitive to the concerns expressed by the public safety and public health communities about anything that would potentially create an additional hazard from a public health or public safety perspective. And I think it's important, from my perspective, to recognize that the situation in Massachusetts has been more intense than many other parts of the country. So although we're not necessarily doing this as early as some other cities around the country, we are, I think, pretty much in lockstep with our partners in the region. Somerville has announced some things. Boston is going to soon. But I think we're all basically in the same time frame in terms of when we're starting to implement these types of changes. So I feel confident that we're kind of being respectful of the public health needs while also being moving forward as aggressively as we can to, repurpose our streets in a way that's appropriate. So the first thing that we're looking at doing, and really the main, specific proposal we have that we would like to start implementing, towards the middle of next month, is a set of 3 shared streets that would more or less, not 100%, but would provide some connections more or less across the entirety of the city, all the way from Fresh Pond and Danny Park through Harvard Square and down towards Kendall Square, passing, not quite by Central Square, but then another piece that would run from Central Square to the river along Magazine Street. And so you have the map and the list in the handout. But I think like I said, the really important part of this was not just to create a set of streets, but also to create a set of streets that more or less connect. And I recognize that on the map they don't actually, fully connect. But if you think about the Garden Street portion that connects to the Common, and from there you can sort of cross over Harvard Yard, around Harvard Yard, and get to Harvard Street. And then similarly, there are some, it's not direct connection, but you can get from the Harvard Street corridor over to Magazine Street as well. So the idea, like I said, is not just to create some sort of random set of streets, but start to think about a network. Obviously, there's more pieces that have to be created to this that could come in the future. But we thought that this was a good starting point for building out that network in a way that was meaningful for the community. Importantly, in identifying these streets, there were a couple of different factors that we had in mind. One is these are all streets, as it notes on the handout, that are part of the bicycle plan network. So these have already been identified as corridors that we want to have priorities for sustainable transportation. But at the same time, other than a portion of Magazine Street, they don't have bus routes on them, and we wanted to make sure that we stayed away from any major impacts on the MBTA as we started to establish these. We think the 64 in one direction on Magazine Street is manageable within this context, but we'll obviously need to work with the T to notify their drivers and operations to deal with this. So that was one component, or those are two components. One was the existing identified bike plan network, as well as the lack of impact on transit, and then we also wanted to try to connect some key destinations. So as I mentioned, on the western end, it gets you all the way to Fresh Pond, and you can connect on off-road paths along Fresh Pond Parkway to a whole range of destinations beyond that, and then up to Cambridge Common, and then down to Kendall Square, as well as along Magazine Street to the river. So that was sort of some of the thoughts that we had in mind as we identified these streets. I guess the other thing I really wanted to focus on is kind of what is a shared street. So the idea behind a shared street, and I would say that this is something that is an approach that many cities around the country have been using in response to COVID-19, is that the street is not completely closed, but more that there's markers and signs along the way that are illustrated on the second page that indicate that this is a shared street, that there may be people walking and certainly biking in the street, and vehicles should only travel along the street if they're accessing sort of that block or that local area, so we can make more space available in a safer way for bicyclists and pedestrians and people who are just out and about trying to travel within their neighborhood, but also potentially longer distances across the city. And so the idea is that it still remains open for local residents to access. For example, if they have a driveway on the street, it remains open for emergency vehicles, and we have talked both to the police commissioner and to the fire chief about this, and also open, importantly, for deliveries, since in this moment we know that there's a lot of people getting various kinds of things delivered, and we need to make sure that we are, allowing for that activity to occur. So this is not like Memorial Drive, where the street is closed completely, but rather more of a shared operation. But again, that would be in place 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So the idea is that we're kind of giving people a better place to be out and about, whether, like I said, whether they're walking or cycling. In all of these cases, I would say there's also a reasonably good alternate route for cars that are trying to travel through the city. So, Garden Street is roughly paralleled by Concord Avenue. Harvard Street is roughly paralleled by Broadway, and Magazine Street has, several parallel streets kind of going up and down through that part of Cambridgeport. So we feel like we're not doing too much to constrain people's ability to drive around if that's what they need to do, but we're identifying better space for cyclists and pedestrians to get around. And on the second page, you can kind of see examples of what the signs might look like. We're still working out the details, but this is fairly far along in terms of what we might think they look like. So that certainly at every major intersection and most of the sort of minor intersections, we'd have two sets of signs. One's more of a regulatory sign that says local access only, kind of similar to when there's construction on a street and we only want abutters traveling down that street. And then the second sign is more sort of a programmatic sign that talks about the shared street access, kind of sends the message both about cars yielding to pedestrians, but also about the physical distancing for the pedestrians and cyclists who are out on the street. And then there's a multilingual message to that effect as well as an opportunity, some contact information for people who have questions or who want to provide feedback on the program. So the idea, like I said, is we'd have, dozens and dozens of these signs along the way, along these routes, to try to mark these for drivers, but also for cyclists and pedestrians. We might also have signs mounted on the sort of regular street poles along the way, just as a reminder about the shared street aspect of this, both for all the users who might be out there, as a reminder to cyclists and pedestrians as well as drivers. So that is sort of the quick overview of the how the shared streets aspect of this would work. Like I said, there's more details in the handout about the exact operation of how these would go. I will say, as I mentioned earlier, we have done a lot of research on what other cities are doing, both locally and across the country. We've spoken multiple times with staff from Boston and Somerville to understand what they're planning and try to not necessarily align exactly, but make sure we're in coordination, particularly with Somerville, where because of the municipal border being such a sort of permeable area, and people often don't know if they're in Cambridge or Somerville at that point anyway, is making sure that we're not creating sort of weird changes at the border, those kinds of things, but also just generally to make sure our work is coordinated. And similarly with Boston, just to know what they're thinking, what they're planning. And then we've done research on a number of other cities around the country that have been doing similar things. Again, some of these areas are ahead of us because the extent of the COVID-19 prevalence has been lower, and so they've been able to move more quickly. And then finally, we've been working very closely with NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, which has had a number of resources related to this. Most recently, they released this Streets for Pandemic Response and Recovery publication that really is kind of a guide to these kinds of tactical interventions on city streets, and I was part of the review panel that reviewed this prior to it being issued, so I was able to take a look at it before it went out publicly last week. And so the thought process in that has very much informed the work that we've been doing, or the planning we've been doing up to this point. And then finally, I guess the what might come next section at the bottom of page 2 is just kind of pointing towards what we could do in the future. And again, we're very much looking for feedback from the council as well as other members of the public on this, but obviously we also want to try to move quickly to respond to needs. So in addition to, what we've proposed or mentioned today, we certainly would see this type of shared street approach expanding to other streets in the city, assuming that the initial implementations are successful and folks are supportive of that, and trying to kind of create, like I said earlier, more of a citywide network of these types of connections where they don't already exist through other existing facilities. We've been working very closely over the last few weeks, again, with the business community, and I think that's a really important component of what we want to have happen next. And we have already started to get ideas and things that the businesses want to implement, whether that's in terms of expanding dining, into the parking lane, or possibly in some cases, closing down a side street to make more space available for dining. I think one of the challenges right now is that until the state releases more specific guidelines on exactly how in-person dining will be allowed to reopen, it's a little hard to know exactly what restaurants need. So we're kind of in a bit of I wouldn't say a holding pattern, because we're certainly talking to them, but we can't necessarily finalize anything until we have a little bit better information about exactly how that's allowed to occur. But we're certainly totally supportive of doing more of that, obviously in line with all of the permitting and licensing requirements that go along with those kinds of changes. We are continuing, like I said earlier, to add more pickup areas for restaurants, and also we're open to that as an option for retail businesses as well, if that makes sense for them as a business model. And again, I'm not the expert in how to operate a retail business, so I want to be respectful of their needs and their expertise in that area. And then, we've had some interesting ideas proposed to us from both the Harvard Square Business Association and the Central Square Business Association in terms of sort of more significant adaptive use of space, whether it's, Central Square Business Association is very interested in trying to do something innovative in the parking lot 5, which is the one behind the H Mart in Central Square. And I think the Harvard Square Business Association has expressed sort of some interest in more significant, maybe not all the time, but more significant street closures to accommodate outdoor dining and just, creating space for people to be in the square while maintaining the proper physical distancing, just like they were doing on Memorial Drive over the weekend. So I think, we're working very closely with the businesses through the Small Business Advisory Committee that the city manager set up, and I think that's been a great forum for them to share information with us and us to share, our expertise in terms of street design and urban design from community development with those businesses as well. And then I think the final pieces that we would look to next are, generally looking at the width of sidewalks in busy areas, and is there a need to add more space? Brookline has done this in one of their business districts to just kind of expand the sidewalk out into the street somewhat in order to create space for circulation so people can physically distance more easily. And I think that's particularly concerning for us right around transit stations. So if you imagine the sidewalks in Central Square, they can be tight under the best of times. And so we may need to look at how we can manage that space better and use the street for that as well. I think also we want to look and work with the T on ways that we can help buses move more reliably and operate more frequently, because when they're stuck in traffic congestion, then we run into problems. They run into problems with the reliability of the service, which means that they can be crowded even if they don't sort of have to be. So even if they're carrying fewer customers than normal, if you wind up with one crowded bus, that's obviously a big problem under the current circumstances. So we want to try to help them operate more reliably. And if they can operate more quickly, then they can actually operate more service using their current fleet. And so we don't have any specific proposals on that yet, but I think that is something that we want to be investigating next. And now that we've sort of started this public conversation, have those conversations with the T as well. So the final thing I wanted to talk about, and then obviously open to any questions, the process moving forward. For these initial 3 streets that we've identified, our plan would be to do some community notifications in the ways that are described in the handout, even phone, email, social media. Obviously, the city has a significant communications process related to COVID-19, so we can take advantage of people's use of that, as well as local community groups and neighborhood associations and the business associations. We'd also hope that the city council would help us in getting the word out about these. You all have, large lists and social media presences as well. And we'd also want to sort of put flyers out on the street to let people know that these shared street sort of pilots are coming. Hopefully, our goal would be to implement them in the middle of June, subject to being able to get the right materials and make sure we've gotten the word out sufficiently. But assuming that all works, that would be our goal. Like I said, would be sometime in mid-June. And then in terms of the other ideas that I mentioned, sort of providing some channels for feedback. Like I said, continuing to work with the Small Business Advisory Committee, and then using many of the same tools that I just described for getting the initial word out. We want to go back to those folks or to those communications channels and get more ideas and more suggestions for kind of where we go next with this. Because on the one hand, I think we bring, collectively through the city staff, a lot of technical expertise in this area to be able to do this planning and lay these out. But at the same time, I think, we want to make sure the community is not just hearing about these, but has an opportunity to tell us, well, these are the places we think there's the greatest need, or where we think that there's something interesting that could happen, particularly with the businesses, but even just with the community at large. So that's my maybe long-winded presentation. So I'll turn it back to the manager.
Okay, I really want to thank Joe for all his work. I think he's put a really great plan together, and it will continue to grow, so I want to thank him. The next person, Matt Nelson, is going to come up to the podium. Matt has really been the face of the manager's office in terms of making sure that all the businesses, all the residents that have been affected by all the decisions and guidelines sent out by the state and the city are made aware of what to do, how to do them, and how, as a city, we can help them get through this. And Matt's done a phenomenal job bringing everybody together to have discussions and coming up with ideas of what's the best steps the city can do to help. And Matt's going to give you an update of what's been going on in those areas. So, Matt.
Thank you, City Manager, and to the Mayor and City Council. Just a few quick updates. I imagine the Council has questions, especially after that presentation from Joe Barr. But the City Manager asked me to report out on a few items related to reopening and recovery, specifically with the committees I've been working on with other city departments and the community with construction and our small business community. This week was phase 1 of the city's timeline for bringing back construction. And during this phase, contractors and workers have been adding site safety prep to comply with new standards and guidelines. During this phase, both the Inspectional Services and Public Works have been reviewing submitted safety plans from our contractors. And also this week, Public Works held 2 large virtual meetings with their contractors to go over the requirements. Through those calls, over 200 participants from the industry joined in, signaling tremendous buy-in from the community. Inspectional has also been reaching out to all of their contractors and have been able to approve safety plans and work through issues with contractors as they come up. Phase 2 starts Monday, June 1st, adding horizontal construction, city building projects, 100% affordable housing developments, and larger buildings that all have existing permits. Phase 3 will tentatively start on June 15th, which adds all remaining existing permits, and Phase 4, which will be new permits, tentatively starts on June 29th. The dates for Phases 3 and 4 are listed as tentative to give us flexibility to analyze how the implementation of safety standards and guidelines are proceeding. These dates could either be moved earlier or later, depending on that analysis. I also wanted to highlight that as part of the city's amended temporary construction order, we also added a category in essential work which allows at any time with the approval of ISD or DPW. This new category is for work associated with COVID-19 restaurant modifications to help these establishments safely reopen. So if a restaurant wants to pull a new permit to conduct work in their establishment related to COVID-19 prep, they can request that permit at any time during these phases. The 22-member Construction Advisory Group will continue to meet weekly, sharing best practices and reviewing progress and potential issues as these weeks progress. Yesterday, the License Commission sent out a notification delaying second-half liquor licenses until September 30th. This affects approximately half of all licenses, around 135. Depending on the license, this could temporarily relief of anywhere from $900 to $2,000. As the city manager mentioned on Tuesday during his opening remarks at the Finance Committee, the city is continuing to review all other fees associated with our small businesses for FY21, and I imagine an update on this soon after the budget hearings. The city manager has continued to emphasize that here in Cambridge, we are in a place where we can consider significant reductions and modifications to these fees while balancing city revenue, recognizing the need to help however we can in keeping our local businesses afloat. With the governor announcing his reopening plan last week and allowing specific industries to reopen, a number of steps were taken to keep Cambridge establishments as informed as possible during this rollout. As the city manager mentioned, we sent updates to industries that were included in the governor's rollout, such as letters to barbershops and salons, manufacturers, and large businesses. A letter specifically to large businesses in the city asking them to follow the city's lead in delaying the opening of offices until at least June 1st and continuing to encourage remote work when possible. Inspectional Services sent out an email to all restaurants and food serving establishments with an update and a specific food safety checklist focusing on reopening. And ISD staff have been made available to restaurants to help deal with potential opening issues. As the city manager mentioned, he has joined Councilor Simmons and the mayor along with staff from Public Health on calls in the last 2 weeks with leaders of the faith community in Cambridge, talking through state guidelines, and a letter also went out to all places of worship in the city listing resources and contact information. Our Cambridge reopening website continues to be updated, and as was also mentioned earlier, this includes a city department contact sheet for reopening with points of contact for each identified industry in the governor's reopening plan relevant to Cambridge. And recently, the city manager joined Newton and sent a letter to the Attorney General regarding the high cost of third-party delivery fees and asking the Attorney General to examine these fees and consider whether they could be capped. The city has also been in close contact with other cities, including Boston, on this issue, trying to figure out the best way forward. In our 10th week of the Restaurant Homeless Shelter program, which I've reported on before, we've now spent almost $150,000 using our local restaurants to provide meals to some of our most vulnerable restaurants. Again, we're still accepting quotes from all Cambridge restaurants, and if any restaurant's interested, they can email purchasing@cambridgema.gov. I also wanted to quickly call out the Farmers Market. Farmers Market in Central Square has been open for 2 Mondays now, and Community Development has updated the Farmers Market web page on their website with additional guidance and guidelines, along with these updates on market hours and when future markets are scheduled to open. As of now, the Central Square Farmers Market and the Charles River Farmers Market at the Charles Hotel are open. In June, the Morse School Farmers Market and the Harvard University Farmers Market at Science Center are expected to open. Every year, permitting and planning these farmers markets is a collaboration. And this year with COVID, this is internal collaboration is even more important. A big thank you to CDD, Inspectional, Traffic, DPW, Public Health, License, and PIO for helping create an efficient and safe process. And also a big thank you to the Central Square Business Improvement District for working with the Central Square Farmers Market to help secure a safe reopening. And finally, the Small Business Advisory Committee has been meeting weekly on a number of issues. One work product that we plan on rolling out soon is a Pick It Up Local campaign. This was an idea that came directly from the 8-member committee and finalized over the last 2 weeks. The concept of this campaign is focused on local and asking residents to call and pick up their meals when able, saving restaurants up to as much as 25% off their order. I have an image here that I'm going to hold up, but we can also send to the council, and this is the social media image that the city will be issuing, and flyers and postcards will be sent around to all restaurants and food serving establishments in the city, and the city will be picking up this cost. We plan to roll this out in a number of ways real soon. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Matt. And as we've closed every one of these meetings, we have Claude Jacob as our cleanup hitter, and after Claude's done, we'll go right to questions. So, Claude?
Claude, can you hear us? Claude? Can you hear me now? We're having some technical difficulties. Is he still on the line?
He's talking.
Oh, there he is. Claude, your audio is not working. There was a Zoom number that was sent to you. Can you call that number?
Claude's saying give him a second. If he doesn't get it worked out, we can always go to questions and then bring Claude back. Let's try to give him another minute. If he don't hear it, he'll... We got him?
I think we're waiting for him to fix his audio. He's still on the Zoom. He's still logged into Zoom.
I think I just prefer to wait.
Claude, your audio over the web isn't working, so if you can just get out of the Zoom and call directly from your phone, you can just do it over the phone.
I'm going to text him that information. Maybe it would be easy for us to just call him and put him on speaker. With the microphone right in front of us, the commissioner can do that.
Okay, okay. Claude asked that if someone could try to unmute him, then he may be able to speak. If that doesn't work, then I can try putting him on speaker using this microphone.
All right, good afternoon. Claude, can you hear me now?
Yep, I think we're making progress.
Apologies for the technical difficulties.
Claude, just a little louder, please, but it's coming in.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, apologies. Good afternoon, everyone.
Oh, we're getting back.
Sounds like you have two microphones on, Claude.
How's that?
You may have to turn off your computer volume or something.
Claude, if you could turn off your computer and just turn your computer volume down or mute it and just operate your audio from your phone.
Claude?
Have we lost him?
Claude, do me a favor, just dial my cell, and we're going to put you right on through my phone. I think that's, at this point, the best way to go. I think it'll come across clearly. So dial my number, I'll put my phone up to the speaker, and let's try that.
He may not be able to
He's
hear you
not-
because
he's not on the
he's not
line.
Zoom.
Oh, he's not on the call
No.
either?
You might have to call him.
Sorry, everyone.
Oh, this is him. Maybe he did hear me. Hey, Claude, did you hear me?
Is the speaker?
Let me turn my speaker on. That would help. Okay, Claude.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me now?
Absolutely.
Yeah, apologies for the glitches once again. So, greetings to one and all, and thank you, Madam Mayor, for this opportunity. So, through you, some quick updates to pick up from the other reports. How's the volume?
Good.
All right. So this is quick, and I'll leave enough time for questions at the end. So our current case count, clearly we've been at this for a couple months. You do receive the regular reports, but just wanted to at least put this into context as to where we are today. So as of this morning, we have 965 total cases reported among Cambridge residents for being COVID positive. Just know that a third of those cases are attributed to the long-term care facilities. To date, we've had over 100 individuals hospitalized as reported to our department. There are currently 22 individuals in area hospitals. Sadly, we've had 90 fatalities among Cambridge residents, and just know that 3/4 of those fatalities are attributed to our nursing home and long-term care facilities. And there have been a few reports about what's happening across the Commonwealth. On the flip side, just know that 22% of the reported cases have recovered from their bout with the virus. So just note that over 200 individuals have recovered from having tested positive for the COVID virus. Regarding our data, over the last few weeks, as you receive the maps and the reports, just know that we continue to pay attention to the hotspots across the city. So at first we started out the 5 zip codes. We now provide a composite across the 13 neighborhoods. That helps us to at least deploy our assets as we have now the testing tent in East Cambridge, thanks to the leadership of the Cambridge Health Alliance. We are wrapping up our testing in the Port neighborhood this week, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But as of late, we've noticed a pattern in North Cambridge. So just know that we're paying attention to what we're seeing, at least reported across the city. It allows us to look at the impact on residents. So just a couple of comments related to our testing. And as you well know, we've had a strong partnership in place with Pro-EMS and the Broad Institute of Harvard and MIT. It's allowed us to deploy a rapid testing program, second to none, across the Commonwealth. It's been designed as an early warning system, specifically anchored to the nursing homes, but we're able to replicate that in other pockets. So since early April, to put into context, we've administered over 4,000 COVID tests in area nursing homes, homeless shelters, publicly housed senior buildings, and area hotspots. Earlier this month, again, we were able to establish a testing tent in East Cambridge, which I've mentioned, and while improving the access to the COVID tests through our expanded outreach activities, really, again, can't say enough about our partnership with the Broad, with the ambulance service and Pro, and as well as the fire department, which was mentioned earlier. But just a reminder that regarding the nursing homes, we completed 3 rounds of testing between April 9th and May 5th as part of our enhanced surveillance activities. This included 7 facilities here in the city where we tested residents and staff regardless of symptoms. This pilot project has since been replicated across the Commonwealth with the requirement that at least 90% of residents be tested in order to be eligible for funding support. The positivity rates across these facilities range from 0 to 70%, requiring a variety of different interventions. And keep in mind that these reported positive cases declined steadily with both residents and staff by the third round of testing. So we saw that change over those few weeks. Again, it's important to note that this effort was supported by a separate yet complementary task force comprised of representatives from fire, police, Pro, Mount Auburn, and our department to provide necessary supplies and technical assistance to cohort positive cases while mitigating the spread of the virus at each of these sites. So our staff, in concert with this task force, continue to offer support through clinical guidance and the procurement of PPE. For example, thanks to Pro, we supply the facilities with over 1,500 gowns spread across the facilities in highest need. And we continue to monitor the situation in these facilities. So just to pivot a little bit to talk about our universal homeless testing program. So we try to address the needs of sheltered and unsheltered individuals here in the city. The purpose of the testing was to provide information about the COVID virus, their status, and to those experiencing homelessness, and to those who are in more congregate housing arrangements. A reminder that homeless individuals who tested positive received assistance in accessing one of the designated state isolation and recovery centers. And those who tested negative, who have a history of homelessness in Cambridge, are eligible to be admitted to the field house, the overflow shelter at the War Memorial Rec Center. So again, we try to cover the sites, the homeless shelter sites. So we also try to cater to the needs of the service providers. So we did have some ad hoc mobile testing activities at the Warming Center, Salvation Army, 240 Albany Street, Heading Home, and the YMCA, just to name a few. We've already been testing in the port. So we identified, again, thanks to the leadership and our partnership with the Broad, we were able to at least stand up 6 dates during the month of May. We are at the 5th of the 6 days today. So we have the team over there by Pro, and our final day at the Kazani Center will be on Saturday. We did offer drop-in hours for the area homeless service providers. So from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Was drop-in. And then from 12 p.m. to 8 p.m., we had appointments and walk-ins over at that site. As of today, I heard that we are also able to test women from the area homeless shelters. Again, we can't thank the service providers enough for getting the word out, especially partners at Bay Cove, Healthcare for the Homeless, and the staff at DHSP, the Department of Human Service Programs, as well as the Police Department. In addition to the folks in the Port neighborhood who made this service available across the city. Keep in mind, though, that to date, we've tested 157 folks. We did make and have made the service available. We are watching to see how that compares to the East Cambridge testing tent. But just know that that site is still active as of today and will ramp up, close down on Saturday. The lab confirmed positives are included in our full case count. And keep in mind that there's typically a lag before you can see a bump in what's attributed to our increased testing activities. To talk a minute about the senior buildings, we call it the senior splash. So the testing took place between May 20th and this past Tuesday, the 26th. So over the course of 7 days, this was spearheaded by our fantastic team at the fire department. We identified 15 DHA priority buildings, Cambridge Housing Authority buildings. We offered this voluntary testing to all residents. Just know that our consent, our response rate was 71%. We did have a third of folks who refused the service, and we identified another 300 folks who did not answer the door or were not available. So while we don't have plans to date to return to those buildings at this time, we continue to monitor the situation, and we'll see over the coming days the test results, and we'll report that back out. Plans are, as I mentioned, to look at the North Cambridge area as a potential hotspot. We are in the process of assessing our staffing capacity and our supplies while working in concert with the mayor and the city manager's office as we determine next steps. And so we'll keep this council posted. Finally, just a couple comments about contact tracing. Our public health nurses and other staff at the department have served as the first line to conduct the contact tracing and to counsel residents regarding their test results. This is the complement to the wave of testing that's occurred here in the city over the last few weeks. We are one of the early adopters for participating in the state's program called the Community Tracing Collaborative. And that program is staffed and supported by volunteers from Partners in Health, as well as the Student Public Health Volunteer Corps. Starting this week, or later this week, we are beginning to assist, we're tapping into that student people power to assist us with our outreach efforts to inform residents of their negative results, not only from the East Cambridge Health Center, but also tied to our outreach efforts with the senior housing and the testing that has occurred at the Pisani Center. We are anticipating over 1,000 of these calls to be made for the foreseeable future and are managing this effort with the help of volunteers. Regarding the quarantine area, let me just, sorry, can I continue and wrap up?
I'd wrap it up, Claude, because it's coming up.
Okay. So, we have, to date, we've had a total of 15 guests who utilize that lower level in the garage. There have been 7 individuals transferred out to the state's Regional Isolation and Recovery Center. Just know that there were another additional 4 individuals who benefited from that service by being eligible to be transported as well to those hotels. The last patient who was transported from that site was last Thursday, May 21st. As was mentioned, the second floor gym, which was originally designated to serve as an isolation unit, has not been activated given the state's support. And just know that we have not had to house any COVID-positive homeless individuals at that site. The quarantine area will be decommissioned as of 7 o'clock tomorrow, so that's Friday, May 29th. Again, we've had it there for 6 weeks. We've staffed it with the support of the Cambridge Health Alliance and Grow EMS, but given the limited activity there, we're comfortable at this time decommissioning that part of the temporary emergency shelter. That concludes my report for now. I do have some comments to address. I know Councilor Zondervan had some questions, and you may have other questions as well. So, sorry for technical difficulties, but thank you for this opportunity to provide this update.
Thank you, Claude. So I guess we're open for questions. Claude, I'm going to keep the phone right by the mic, so if it's yours, you can jump right in, and I'm going to use a different mic.
So it is almost 3 p.m., and with an hour left, we'll go through questions. Ask that you keep it to 2 questions, and if there is more time and there are more questions, I'll open it up further. So we'll start with Councillor Toomey and then Councillor Zondervan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you all for the presentation. Just one comment on the shared streets.
Whoever's, please mute your phones and so forth. Thank you. Councillor Toomey.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just 2 comments on the shared street proposal. Just a direct outreach to all the abutters, residents on those streets. Not everybody has cable and reads whatever media is out there, so I think a direct flyer drop or a mailing would be very helpful in that, just to make sure that as many people as aware as possible, so there's no surprises. And just for clarification, I'm just trying to, on the Garden Street, will you be starting the shared street on Garden Street at the Cambridge Common, or from, it's not really clear. It says Garden Street and Field Street. So I'm just curious, when you say Garden Street, is that at the Cambridge Common that's going to start further up?
Sure, through you, Madam Mayor. So it would start at Arsenal Square, so the intersection with Concord Avenue, because from that point to the Common, there's actually an existing route along what I believe is referred to as Little Concord Ave, the sort of extension of Concord Ave that's on the sort of on the other side of Garden Street towards the Common. So once you get to Concord Ave, you would then transition, if you're trying to sort of have a safe route, onto that stretch of street to get to the Cambridge Common. So that way we avoid the stretch of Garden Street right in front of the Sheraton Commander Hotel, and also don't have any impact on the buses that operate on Concord Ave.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm all set.
And through you, Madam Mayor, I would say the one thing that we have found out over the last few years is, as you just mentioned, Councilor Toomey, the biggest draw to have people come to neighborhood meetings is with good old-fashioned flyering of the neighborhood. So we will absolutely be doing that.
Councillor Zondervan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to the staff. Thank you for that update on the street closures. It would be helpful if we can project these maps and things on the big screen as well, so that anyone at home can follow along. It wasn't entirely clear how long you were planning to keep these shared streets running, and also when you would move to this second phase that you kind of outlined but wasn't fully specified yet.
Through you, Madam Mayor, and actually with your indulgence, I think it's probably worth me just saying out loud the limits of the streets that we're referring to, just for folks who couldn't see it at home. So on Garden Street, it would be, like I mentioned, starting at Concord Ave, continuing along Garden Street, which then transitions into Field Street, and then eventually into Bay State Road, all the way to New Street, which again kind of connects you to both Danahy Park and to Fresh Pond, or the network of paths along Fresh Pond Parkway. Harvard Street from Quincy Street all the way to Portland Street, so basically Harvard Street for its entire length, and then Magazine Street also for its entire length from Green Street down to Memorial Drive. So to your questions, Councilor Zondervan, the timing, like I said, to implement would be hopefully sometime middle of next month. I think we're looking at these being in place indefinitely as sort of as needed, and obviously if any of us could predict exactly how long our current situation is going to last, we'd be better off, but we can't. And so I think, our assumption is that the need to provide additional space, both for physical distancing and also to allow people to travel more safely, in modes, other than the car, is going to continue for a significant period of time. So I think our intent would be to maintain these as long as possible. It is worth mentioning, though, that once we get into snow season, this becomes more challenging because obviously these are the signage is kind of obstructions in the road. And so we have not kind of gotten to that question yet in detail, but that's something we do need to think about. Luckily, we have some time to work that out, but we do need to think about if in some form these were still in place, in the fall into the winter, we'd need to think about how do we deal with snow operations. And then in terms of what comes next, I think we wanted to sort of present the council today with our initial thoughts, get feedback, make sure that folks were comfortable with the general concepts that we're putting forward. And then if so, then I think we would move very quickly to start identifying and working with local communities to identify other streets, both for this kind of shared street approach, but also for some of the other types of changes that I mentioned obviously for businesses, and that's an ongoing and as Matt mentioned, already underway conversation with the business community, but also things for transit, potentially additional facilities for cyclists, things like that. So I don't think it's not so much a wait till we implement these and then go to the next step. I think we just wanted to kind of roll out some initial thoughts for feedback, and then we could very quickly move to trying to identify additional locations and additional types of changes.
Counselor? You're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Yeah, this looks good so far, and I'm excited, and I look forward to what's to come. I wish we had done this sooner, but here we are, so hopefully we can do it as fast as possible. My second question is regarding, was addressed to Commissioner Bard. I've been getting reports and experiencing some of this myself of some increased police activity in Central Square and in my neighborhood in Wellington, Harrington. And, there's a lot of fireworks activity going on every night. So I was a little surprised that you didn't address any of those in your remarks. Can you comment on whether there is increased police activity, and if so, what's causing that? What are we doing about the fireworks, which I believe are illegal? And also, we do want to make sure that none of this escalates into violent encounters like we're seeing in other cities that are really concerning. So I would love some more comments on that, please.
Through you, Madam Mayor, Councilor, in reference to the fireworks, over the course of the last 3 or 4 nights, we've had increased calls. Many times they come in as gunshots, but they actually have been fireworks, and so we've been addressing that through high visibility. It's obviously impossible to be present everywhere, but officers have been hearing them and seeing the fireworks at the same time the calls have been being reported. So we've increased our presence, and we continue to respond and try to dissuade individuals from using fireworks. And I think on Sunday, the fireworks were being set off in the wee hours of the morning, which was particularly disturbing. As far as increased activity in Central Square, I addressed it a couple of weeks ago by comment and saying that we've been getting increased complaints of inappropriate behaviors from certain members of the community. So we've tried to have a heightened awareness. I want to stress that it's important to us that, before this crisis came to be, that, we built up a lot of trust in certain communities, and it's important that we come through this crisis with that same amount of trust through, our vulnerable communities. So we're trying to do our best to balance the delicate needs of our vulnerable population, but then also address some inappropriate behaviors that we've been getting inundated with reports of. So it's a balancing act, and we're trying to walk that line.
Counselor?
Thank you. I appreciate that, and it would be helpful if we could, not right now, but on a regular basis, get a little bit more detailed reports on what's going on exactly and how that's being addressed to make sure that that balance is being maintained. Thank you again.
Madam Mayor, I just give an
Yes.
update. So I just talked to Lee Gianetti, and this presentation will be put on the website as we speak. So if someone wants to quickly look at what we're talking about on shared streets, they can go to cambridgema.gov/COVID-19, and what we're talking about should be on the screen. So that could be helpful. So thank you.
Okay. Councillor Sabrina Wheeler.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you. I first had a question about the War Memorial site and for the quarantine area that's being closed down. Where are homeless residents go now if they've been in contact with someone who's tested positive for COVID-19 once that section is shut down?
So, through you, Madam Mayor. Council, was your question what is happening to the individuals who would have been in the quarantine section?
Exactly. Yep.
Oh, okay. So the just like at the last hour, the state stepped in to handle all of our positive individuals. They've also stepped in now to handle individuals who are in limbo. That means awaiting the status of their test. So over the last week, over the last couple of weeks, our need to house them in a quarantine area has dwindled as to such that we won't be needing the space anymore after tomorrow. So officially it shuts down the 30th. Functionally, the last person will be in there tomorrow, but we don't have anybody there. So the state is housing them in one of these 7 regional facilities.
Gotcha. Thank you. And I had a couple questions about the streets initiative, shared streets. Overall, I think it's a great start, connecting key destinations, including Fresh Pond, Cambridge Common, the public housing, we're at Newtown Court, Washington Elms, to Harvard Square, Cambridge Common. It'd be great to see connectors we talked about in the future, and North Cambridge, Strawberry Hill, Inman Square areas. I understand there aren't as streets quite as long as these ones, but there's can be connectors to the street that we're doing now, and those areas also have some public housing and affordable housing projects where residents could really take advantage of these. I hope we can also publicize proposed future streets to sort of give folks an awareness of where they might be going in. I was looking at the Somerville streets, and they have, in addition to the streets they're currently rolling out, future proposed shared street projects that are draft, subject to change, but sort of give people a sense of where they could expect them to sort of add commentary in. The questions I had, the first one was just when will these actually start? Are they rolling out later this week, or is it still up in the air?
Dear Madam Mayor, so we need to procure some more materials and the signs for this, because these aren't things that we have large quantities of in stock normally. So we're working on that. We've already started that process, and our hope is that if that procurement, I mean, there's an issue because a lot of different places are kind of doing the same thing. So we're just like not quite in the same way as PPE, but somewhat similar. There's a high demand for these all of a sudden, and so we're trying to get the materials we need, and our hope would be to implement these the week of June 15th if all goes well, just because we want to make sure that we've got the right signage and barriers to make sure that people feel safe as they travel on these streets.
Okay, thanks. That was one of my next questions, actually, was just trying to get a sense of how they're going to function. They are pretty long stretches, which I think is great, but just trying to get a better sense of what's going to deter folks from driving along them if they aren't, if they don't live on the street or aren't doing a delivery. Are there going to be barricades like they're doing in Somerville, or is signage just going to be really clear, and what's the enforcement going to be like?
Sure, so through you, Madam Mayor. So the intent is that there will be barricades with signs on them certainly at every major intersections, and then at additional locations at more minor intersections. And so those will be sort of permeable. You can drive around them if you need to get to the local block, but they would be the intent is that they would sort of be an inconvenience enough that it wouldn't really be advantageous to, drive down that street because you'd constantly be having to navigate around, some sort of blockage. Plus, we hope a significant, but not too significant number of pedestrians and cyclists who are traveling. So the hope is that they become, I don't want to say self-enforcing, but that it becomes clear to drivers that this is not a place that you want to be. The other thing we've talked about, at least for these initial ones, because they all do generally have sort of alternate routes that are relatively close by and are fairly clear, is we may also try to post some signs that say, local access only, use Concord Ave, something like that. So we're actually trying to direct people to, hey, there's another way to make this trip. That may not work universally as to your earlier statement, as we deploy these more widely, because it may not be that every single one of these has such a clear alternate route. But if we do have an alternate route that we can recommend, we would do that. The other thing is, I think we want to work closely with the navigation apps or report these, and they've sort of come to have a way to represent these to some extent, so that people who are using those will be, directed away in the first place before they even wind up trying to use one of these streets.
That makes sense. And the last question I have was on the two-pager that the council got. It talks about, in terms of future next steps, one might be facilities to help buses operate more frequently and reliably. Does this include bus-only lanes as a potential future outcome, or is it more what was described earlier, sort of expanding sidewalks around bus stops? Is it just that sort of thing that we can expect?
Through you, Madam Mayor. No, I think we would want to look at bus lanes in locations where that makes sense. I don't want to say, because we haven't figured this out, exactly where that would be, but I do think that we need, like I said earlier, to help the T to make their service operate as reliably as possible to avoid any sort of unnecessary crowding impacts.
Great, thanks for those updates. Yeah, looking forward to holding a transportation committee and hopefully having some folks from the T and city staff as well to hopefully start those discussions. But thanks again for your work on this. That's all on my end.
Councillor Simmons?
Hi, thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you to Mr. DePasquale for this presentation. On the shared streets question, I guess my only concern is that which is given is often difficult to take away. And so are we clear to where we do these shared streets initiatives, that it's not a permanent kind of thing, number one? And the second thing, Atiano, can you, yes. The other thing is how there has to be a balance between what we do for our residents, of course, but also for our businesses. And then lastly, I think that's the two questions I have.
Sure, through you, Madam Mayor. So in terms of your first question, Councillor, I would say that these are all identified in the bicycle network plan as streets where we would want to do changes in the future. So I think I could sort of see these evolving in a few different ways. One is we do this for some period of time. Perhaps as time goes by, the impetus and need goes away and they're removed. Or we could sort of use this as an opportunity to transition them into the type of street that we've identified them for already, in terms of, a lot of them are not necessarily separated bike lane streets, but more streets where we want to try to achieve a better balance for cyclists to be able to use them more comfortably even without separated bike lanes, so sort of a low speed, low volume approach. So I think part of the reason for using the bicycle plan as a starting point, or at least one of the inputs into choosing these, is that these are, like I said, these are streets that we want to make changes to anyway. So I think you raise an excellent point. We need to be sensitive to the fact that we don't want these to be just assumed to be this way forever, but at the same time, these are streets that we've already identified for future changes in line with the bike plan.
And if I may, through you, Madam Mayor, I can see you, Mr. Barr. Under the circumstances that we're in this COVID-19 environment, what is very, very different now is we're talking about this, how are we going to reopen our businesses? So my question is, I think we have to turn up the volume in terms of contacting our businesses, engaging them into the conversation. I had the opportunity to go into one of our local businesses. I try to go out and patronize our restaurants in particular. And this is a business I stopped in today that is always teeming with activity. Always teeming with activity. Business is still, even with the sort of grab and go program that we're all trying to do, is down 70%. So yes, we decided to do the Share Streets programs at this point. But it was before COVID-19. And so in a lot of ways, the conversation has to be a little bit different. And we need to, I don't know how we make a balance, because I've sat in a number of the small business advisory meetings, and they're still grappling with how are we going to open, and how do we stay afloat if we're only going by X capacity. And so while we're doing this wonderful thing that we're all committed to, because we all love bikes and want to see the proliferation of bike lanes all over the place, we also have to kind of keep in mind that we're in a new environment, and part of that environment is the small business community that has been struck very hard and is going to have an even harder time recovering.
Through you, Madam Mayor, and I'll turn it over to Joe and Matt. We're in 100% agreement on this. I met this morning with the fact that I had a meeting last night with managers and mayors throughout the region in how we can make restaurants survive, and taking a look at sidewalks and streets and parking lots has to be a priority. And Matt and Owen and Joe have spent a lot of time doing that, and we understand our council's commitment to this, and the mayor, and also you're at those meetings, Councilor Simmons. So I agree 100%. It's all got to be done together, but I do think we're making good progress. That was really the second part of this presentation, but we haven't had it finalized yet. But we will be hopefully having something soon that recognizes the fact that our small businesses need our help.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, to Mr. DePasquale. And that's all I'm trying to press upon us. We have these conversations in some silos. We talk about bikes, and we talk about bikes like nothing else exists. And we talk about businesses, and we talk about them like nothing else exists. And then we talk about pedestrian safety like nothing else exists, as opposed to. And we've been pushing for this, and I don't know if it's happening in private and in secret, but I haven't heard anything about it. So the comprehensive transportation conversation that takes in bikes and pedestrians and mopeds and skateboards and motorized wheelchairs and all of those things that are trying to share the same streets, and overlaid on that is the COVID-19. This is where we are now. So I want to say, while we're doing good things, that we are cautious, that we don't harm a whole other class of people, because we're not taking the impact of something that we voted 6 months, a year ago, and say we're going to implement it now, and the terrain and the environment is different. So I just wanted to be real clear about that. On construction, I know that you're having this plan that you're rolling out, and thank you for doing that. I guess what I need to know is, are we letting construction projects that had already crossed the T's and dotted the I's and are farther along than the master plan are we allowing those construction sites to go forward? Because it seems like if we're not, we're penalizing people that are already been licensed and ready to go, because we have a process that we're not trying to get them to conform to.
Through you, Madam Mayor. No, we are having a safety plan in place, but the priority is projects that were already happening. Certain categories starting first, but the new permits is the last stage. That's phase 4. Phase 4, those are the projects that have not started yet or been permitted. So absolutely the priority has been given to projects that are ongoing, with special categories towards 100% affordable and essential. But yes, no, we've prioritized people that have been already in progress.
Right, and moving toward the end, there was some mention about fireworks in Wellington, Harrington. Well, it wasn't just Wellington, Harrington, it was the port as well. I did hear it. I often take it as the price of living in an urban center. It has been late at night, unfortunately. I would rather our police force pay attention to the large issues of safety, and someone might argue, well, a firework going out is not safety, but on the scale of 1 to 10, it's probably -6 for me. A noise and nuisance, yes, but is our city street safe? And to speak to that, I have noticed that I know we have the homeless shelter working, and we're talking about where it is in terms of operation. Central Square, my biggest.
Counselor Simmons, you're on mute.
Did that by accident, sorry. Thank you. Central Square has been a pretty active area for the homeless community. I know we're trying to work to give them a place to go, and I don't know what it is to say or do, because I can look out my office window right now. In fact, if I took my computer over to it and look down on Carl Barron Plaza, there are 20 people sitting there, fairly rowdy, fairly loud. So if I had to figure out where I was going to use my efforts, chasing firecrackers or trying to work with that homeless population, that's where I would really want to see my effort. We might not agree on that, but I just want to share my opinion.
Counselor Simmons, I don't want to cut you off, but just looking at the time, have to move on.
Last question. Is there PPE for hair salons?
I didn't hear what she said.
Is there PPE for hair salons?
Yes.
Yeah.
Through you, Madam Mayor, Councilor, we're continuing to try to acquire PPE, and to the extent that we have it available, then we'll give it to small businesses as we have it. We have a small supply right now that we continue to give out at headquarters and through our patrol cars, but if a particular business needs them, then they can call us, and if we have this available supply, we'll deliver them.
Thank you. I yield the floor.
Counselor Nolan.
Thank you. Thanks for the updates. I will ask, I think, some questions on streets a little bit later, hoping that the speed on those streets will be addressed also. I believe Oakland, California is a leader in this, maybe even reduce the speed. My first question is related to following up on something that was discussed that the city will be doing, which is pick it up local. The council over a month ago passed an order about capping fees of third-party delivery services. We continue to get emails and pleas from restaurants across the city saying they are losing thousands of dollars a day in delivery fees for third-party apps. There are cities across the country that, as part of an emergency, have managed to pass an emergency and cap the fees, not eliminate them, but cap them and make them transparent. I understand that perhaps Pick It Up Local is our response to try to let people know exactly what the impact on local restaurants is, but all I have to do is quote from one of many, many restaurant owners that have pleaded with us over the last month. Quote, nothing the city can do to have a more immediate positive impact than actually implementing the order that was passed. I know we were told there'd be some kind of report on whether we could do it. I am interested in that, but I really don't know why we haven't tried, particularly because if we unilaterally decided that we would shut down construction and we did so many other things as part of an emergency, it seems like this is something we could have moved forward on. And I also am curious, if all we're doing is telling people pick it up local, well, that's great. Are we explicitly telling them exactly how much a third-party app costs? Because if we don't do that, people may say, oh, I'll get it local, but if it's not exceedingly clear what the cost to the actual restaurant is, if they don't literally go directly to the restaurant and pick it up, then it may encourage people to just participate in the behavior that has been costing all of our small business people across the city thousands of dollars a day.
Through you, Madam Mayor, and Councilor Nolan, I appreciate your frustration. I feel the same. I can tell you we have had numerous conversations. I have brought this up at our meetings with mayors and managers regularly. In every city so far has come to the same conclusion. We do not have the authority in Massachusetts to do that. I have specifically talked directly to Boston and Newton. So based on all our discussions, we have written letters, we're writing letters jointly, we're bringing the delivery services to the table. I think Nancy and Matt have been doing this. This is something that we would have preferred to have done a month ago. It's just not something that we've been told we have the authority to do, and it's frustrating for everybody, especially for small businesses, but we are having conversations. We think, again, we would like to be able to just say it, but we don't, but the conversations seem to be going positive. But this is beyond just the city announcing. I don't know if Nancy or Matt, who've really been the point for this, want to add anything, but believe me, I agree with your frustration. I feel it. I know the business community feels it. But you will see all Massachusetts cities pretty much feel the same way, but none of us have been able to do it. And I can tell you, it is one of the topics that I have brought up numerous times, and we don't have a solution just yet other than talking. So Nancy, I don't know if you feel you can add something on this. If you can, you can take that mic right there, I would suggest, seeing that's open.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor. Sorry about that. So we have been in touch with one of the companies that is called DoorDash, and they have informed us that they have cut the fees that are normally charged by 50% during the COVID crisis. We asked them to agree to more than that, and they are in the process of writing back to us to explain to us whether they're willing to or not. These delivery services do have contracts with the restaurants that use them, and we've been told by the companies when we have spoken with them that they would consider any kind of legislation to be an intentional interference with contractual relations and would be illegal. So we have done a lot of legal research on this. There's also, well, there's some other issues involved. I don't really want to get into legal strategy, but we do not believe that we have the authority to do that unilaterally as a municipality in Massachusetts. So we do think that the Attorney General possibly has the authority to create a regulation under her consumer protection powers, and we have sent a letter to the Attorney General urging her to do that. And we also, there are options for the council to request to submit a home rule petition or general legislation, which I believe is already pending. So that's the array of options, and we certainly have been working very hard on trying to explore anything and everything to see what we can do. But the bottom line is, right now, as the manager said, we don't have the legal authority to simply do that unilaterally.
I think Matt wants to add something.
Matt?
I think Matt.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. And just specific to Councilor Nolan's question about the Pick It Up Local marketing campaign, which is still on the press, hot off the press from this morning's small business meeting. I realized that when I showed it to the council when I was at the podium, the council might not have seen it through Zoom. So I'll send it around to the council as well. But on the flyer, it does say picking up your food saves local restaurants up to 25% per order. And so just to your point, that is an important line to make sure is on the campaign. And we also, with this, will have a social media and marketing strategy. And like a number of our campaigns and initiatives that we've done throughout this, I imagine neighboring cities might also jump on board here, and that could even add more pressure to some of these companies.
Councilor Nolan?
Thank you. I know you've all been trying, and I'm sure you want us to do this. It's not only frustrating not to be able to do it, but to know that cities across the country have done it. So have we reached out to them? I mean, yes, we're in Massachusetts, but other cities have actually done it. Why not try? And also, there's been nothing in writing for us about the legal rationale why we can't. So we keep getting emails from people, and we can't say anything. And it was over a month ago. So it would be really good to have that legal rationale in writing. And it would also be great for you to engage the council. If it includes the Attorney General, we're happy as a council to engage the Attorney General and encourage her to do it if she has the wherewithal. We have already, as a council, passed at the last meeting a unanimous resolution in favor of the House Bill 5054, that will have to go through hearings at the state level. So we're already ahead of that. We've already tried that. It's just, it would be really good to have something in writing about why we can't do it. I know you all want to do it. It's just, it's frustrating when we talk about saving small businesses and we do all this work, and yet this is one that is literally costing thousands of dollars every single day for many, many restaurants, and we've already lost a bunch. So I hope we get something in writing legally so that we can reply to people. And if you need us to engage us and the public, if it's the Attorney General who can do it more quickly, let us do it. It's really critical. I have another question, which is on the face coverings mask order. I appreciate the update, which was referenced in the city manager's opening statement about what was happening, in that I noticed it was amended as of May 25th, I believe, or 26th. However, what I don't understand is why it was not amended per the council order that was passed 10 days ago that explicitly said that we need to make sure people understand that inside any building, our order that passed was exempting 2 and 3 families, but any multi-unit building, that in fact it is not enough to be 6 feet away, that if you're in the common area of a building with 50 apartment units or 100 or 300, our current order, as I read it online, says as long as you can be 6 feet away, you cannot have a mask on. And yet outdoors, you could be 100 feet away from the nearest person and you need a mask on. Personally, my feeling is that outdoor is not based on science, but I'm not questioning that. What I am questioning is why the order that Councilor McGovern and I brought to the council, and the council passed unanimously, that said, let's amend our own mask face covering order to make it very clear that if I go into a common area of a building that has an elevator and I go in the elevator, if no one's in there, I can take off my mask, I can breathe. We know that elevators have an enclosed, non-ventilated air circulation, and the next person who goes on, even if I'm not in it, if I step off and they step on, it may well actually breathe in air. So it would be really helpful for me to know why that was not amended. Are you just choosing to ignore it, or are we going to amend it and we're just behind? It just seems like that is something that we need to message to people, that it's when you're indoors, in common area, inside, we know that ventilation in those small areas is a problem.
This is Nancy Cloa again, through you, Madam Mayor. We did not look at that aspect of the order. What we were doing was addressing the change for businesses. So I'd be happy to look at it, and we can further amend it if that's something that the manager wants to approve.
Well, yeah, I mean, it would at least be, the council passed it. It is a policy order. It was an ask of something that is based on science and medical evidence. So it's again, a little hard to know why was that order not even looked at, because it was pretty clear about including all buildings that are not 2 and 3 family residential units. And in fact, I would argue that the current status, which is you can be inside in a work environment, unless you're alone in a room, it currently says I could be in a room that's big enough and be 6 feet away from someone and not have to wear a mask, which again runs counter to science. So I hope the city manager looks at it quickly and amends it. And if you don't amend it, then please explain to us why that order that we passed was not something that you thought should be amended. That would just be really helpful for us to know. Maybe there's a reason.
We'll get you an update, Councilor Nolan.
Thank you.
The next person is Councilor McGovern.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'll just piggyback quickly on what Councilor Nolan just said. I'm in agreement. I'd like us to take a look at that. And I know, there's what we want to have happen and what policies and ordinances we put into place. And then we know kind of what happens in practice. And I don't think, if somebody is working in a store or is in a store and they're not required to wear a mask inside unless they're within 6 feet of someone, I don't anticipate many people are going to be putting their mask up and down or doing that. I mean, I just don't see that when I go to restaurants. It just doesn't happen. So we need to make it the ordinance. And then on the shared streets, one of my concerns around this throughout this has been, do we create spaces where more people will congregate? And I think some of that's gotten better because of the mask ordinance, and there are more people wearing masks now than were when we started this conversation before. But are we going to use this as also an opportunity to educate people and inform people? I think as things are starting to loosen up, we're seeing this horrifically in other states, but even here, that as we're talking about reopening and things are starting to loosen up, I'm really afraid people are going to be less diligent than they already are, and there's a lot of people who haven't been diligent at all. And so it's great that we're going to be having these shared streets, but are we going to be having any folks there to make sure people are social distancing, to make sure people are wearing masks, to make sure that's safe? I'm glad Riverbend Park worked out well this one day, but I'm concerned moving forward as people get less, less diligent.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that would be our plan. We had that last Sunday out in force, and we would do the same thing just to help people understand why we feel it's important. And the police department, he's done an exceptional job with that, and we would have other people available if needed. But I think you're absolutely right. The more we can inform the public, the better.
Okay, thank you. And then second question, we've been getting some emails. With people not wearing masks in stores. There's some emails about people not wearing masks in common areas in residential buildings. Where should we be? Sometimes I just kind of forward those on to you, Mr. Manager. Who's following? Is that an inspectional services issue? Is it a police department issue? Where should I be directing people, and where should we be following up to ensure these complaints are being addressed?
I have been working directly with inspectional on all of those matters, and if inspectional needs further support, sometimes we would call Commissioner Bob, but we've been going through inspectional for all those complaints, and they've had someone out there pretty quickly on all the complaints that I've received.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Vice Mayor Mallon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you to the city manager and your staff. I'm so happy to be hearing some of these updates on our shared streets. I know that there's been a lot of work put into them. I know that we've all been really eagerly awaiting this update. So I had a chance to be down at Memorial Drive all day on Sunday, and it was an amazing opportunity to be out in the sunshine. There were plenty of people, but it never felt crowded. It never felt unsafe. And I'm just really looking forward to this expanding. So I guess my question is, the DCR has closed the roads that have been closed over the COVID public health crisis indefinitely. So Francis Parkman Drive in Jamaica Plain, Green Oak Boulevard in Watertown, William J. Boulevard in Boston. These have all been closed 7 days a week and now indefinitely into the future. So if we, are talking about an expansion of Memorial Drive, are we talking about just Saturdays and Sundays, or are we talking about 7 days a week like they are doing in other parts of the city, which have been working really, really well?
We would take all into consideration. We've started those conversations. I think we would probably start off at less than 7, but we are in those discussions. But we've had one successful week. I think it will continue to be successful. We certainly have heard from the council on this, but I don't want to say 7, but I certainly think we're open to continue this discussion and move forward to get to a place where I think people will be satisfied. And I actually reached out to DCR this week to start those discussions.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Madam Mayor, through you. My next question is to Joe Barr. The presentation, thank you for showing the mapping, and I hope that that phase 2 is already mapped out and ready to roll for when phase 1 is implemented, so we can move quickly on it. The other items I know we discussed are widening the side, or allowing for restaurants to have outdoor space. But I think the wording that you might have used was a little concerning, which was what might come next, because I'm under the impression that this outdoor space for restaurants is definitely coming next. But we're working out some of those details with the Small Business Advisory Committee that's been meeting and other relevant city departments. So I guess I'm just asking Mr. Barr if he could just talk about that language a little bit. Is it a might or it will, and we're just working out some details?
Sure, through you, Madam Mayor. So I think the how should I put it? The use of the word might was, I think, out of respect to the council in terms of I didn't want to assume that we would do these things until we'd heard some feedback from you, given that today most of the feedback, or I would say almost all the feedback has been positive. I think we can say that, yes, we will be expanding in those ways. Exactly where and exactly how, I think, is still a discussion, particularly with the businesses. One of the things that I'm very sensitive to is, as I said earlier, I'm not a retail business operator. I don't know exactly what they need, so I want to be open to what they might need, but respectful of their expertise and their, ability to sort of help us understand those needs, and then we can help them figure out exactly what we will do with our streets creatively to meet those needs. So I think we're absolutely committed to working with those businesses, and obviously, as I said, there's some we have to be respectful of licensing and permitting requirements, but within those constraints, I think we're very open to using our streets creatively to help those businesses recover. And I would say, from my perspective, we talked on Tuesday about the shortfall in the parking fund, and the way we get back to a better place in terms of parking fund revenues is by bringing people back into Cambridge to patronize those businesses, use the meters, use the parking lots, those kinds of things. And so it's very much in certainly my department's interest to see all of those business activities recover as quickly as possible. If that means some short-term changes or even some longer-term changes, those are the things we have to do to be successful in the long run and to make sure that our businesses are successful in the long run. So yes, we're absolutely committed to those. And like I said, the use of the word might was only just to, make sure that if for some reason this went over like a lead balloon, we had a little bit of room to maneuver.
So thank you, and thank you for clarifying the language, Madam Mayor, through you. I just wanted to make one last point around, this idea of closing down streets for restaurants to operate outside. There was a policy order last council term around closing sort of that heart of Harvard Square that does get closed down for festivals, on a not regular basis, sort of on the open Newbury model. Where they close the entire street down and it's close to vehicular traffic, just, to have that additional opportunity to walk in the street. That has not been reported back on. So I would just throw it out there as, it's another opportunity for us to think about, especially Harvard Square, and providing that additional access for restaurants and maybe even outside shopping. So I did want to just mention that hasn't been reported back on, and maybe that could be under consideration as we think about what streets to open to support our small businesses and our restaurants moving forward. But thank you for the presentation, and thank you for your work. I look forward to phase one of the shared streets being put in rather quickly, and for what's next. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I yield the floor.
Just very quickly, in response to the Vice Mayor's comment, Madam Mayor, we were actually working on a response to that council order when COVID-19 sort of became what it is, and decided that it was kind of hard to know exactly what the answer should be, but we're very much focused on those kinds of things. And I would say we actually did do a walkthrough, myself and John Nardone from DPW, with Denise Jolson of Harvard Square a few weeks ago to sort of get her initial ideas on what kind of changes she thought made sense. And I think, as I I alluded to earlier, I think a lot of the businesses are just waiting to know a little bit more about how the state will allow them to reopen and in what form and in what density. And then once we have that, then I think we can move very quickly to solidify those plans into actual reality.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I just want to follow up. We've worked clearly, and I want to thank all our departments with the understanding that we need to move on quickly. And the support of the department heads who have been involved has been really strong, and Matt's been involved as well. So this will happen, and we will get there, I assure you.
Councilor Carlone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In the past, when Brattle Street in particular was being discussed as a pedestrian way, even temporary, retail owners were the ones that were against it, and typically throughout the world, retailers are concerned. So if in this case the retailers are feeling good about it and knowing they need to do something special, that's a major step forward. And indeed, this has happened even in Italy with all the closed streets. There was concern, and then there was an increase in sales as a result. So my questions and comments really relate to the shared street proposal that Mr. Barr has talked about. And I applaud the city for moving forward on this. But really, these shared streets, as you define them as connector streets, are about movement. And the question came up earlier by a few councilors, how do you limit traffic or control traffic? And at least in urban design work, and I'm working on a one-off, which is the Dutch word for a shared or a play street, in another city, you lower the speed limit dramatically on any vehicle. Vehicles crawl. Pedestrians and bikes, as you said, are dominant. But even bikes go slower. So the key there is the speed limit. Nothing on the signage indicated a speed limit. I don't expect as connector streets it'll be 5 miles an hour, but I would imagine, since we have 20 mile per hour roads, that this is 10 miles an hour if it's a connector street, or I don't see how it prevents anybody going down Harvard Street. So that's my question. What is...
So through you, Madam Mayor, it's confusing, but we don't have the statutory authority to officially lower the speed limit below the 20 mile an hour slow zones that we're already doing, and I believe all of these streets are already part of that program, although we may not have signs up on all of them yet. What we've done with other shared streets is we've put up an advisory 10 mile an hour speed limit signs, and we would intend to do that here as well. So I think you're right, 10 miles an hour is a more appropriate speed, and we would hope that the people would try to stick to that, particularly if there are pedestrians and cyclists out there. But legally, we don't have the authority to go below the 20 miles an hour under state law, unless there was some change in state law.
I would suggest that you add to that children playing, that it's that kind of special street, which gets me to my second point. These are connector streets, but one of the things I've been advocating, and at least one other councilor, if not two, has been advocating, is the other definition of a shared street, which is called a play street. And I realize we have COVID-19, but there are short streets, some are dead ends, that have very little traffic on them. And quite frankly, that's where I grew up. I played in the street all the time, and I would suspect the manager did as well back in those days. And we have, maybe in the next phase, have many opportunities for these kinds of streets. And Joe, I know you know of them. And I hope we begin looking at that. And they, in a way, become a plaza, if you will, in the European sense, for neighborhoods that aren't immediately next to a park. And I hope we do that. My second question is more procedural. Since we're focusing on COVID-19 today, and I think it's great that we're doing that, I hope we continue having a separate meeting. Will the public be able to ask questions about these discussions on Monday night? Because we're discussing it today and not in the city council hearing itself?
Yeah, on Monday we'll have public comment.
Can they discuss the subjects that have come up in this meeting?
Well, I think because as a general, there may be an additional, we're still going to have a COVID-19 update on Monday night. So if there are more updates, city manager, you can wrap them all up in that discussion.
Yes, we'll have an update on COVID-19 early on. So that would make it open for the public for comment, and then we would, have a comment, and we could have Joe back here Monday, if that makes sense.
The reason I say it is I think the comments will be generally positive, and if they're not listening to this, and let's face it, they might not be, then there's even if it's just a quick summary that we are going to have shared streets, here are the three. Nothing more. Go see the website. I think the word starts getting around, and it only helps the process. Thank you very much. I yield.
Truly, Madam Mayor, I agree. I think that's a great point. Monday, you have a bigger audience, so I think this is important. So we can do a very, very, very short version of this just to get the word out and then follow up. We're only planning one presentation for Monday where it's such a short time period, and that's more where we're going with the reopening of city buildings and departments. So we certainly have time to put this in as well, and then I'll talk to Claude also.
And I think what has been happening is folks have been calling in and just speaking to the general update. And so between now and then, the weekend, as this presentation is live, we can direct people to give us their thoughts on Monday night as well. So it's 3:53. We have a few minutes left. Are there any last minute burning questions from anyone else? I don't see any. So I think one thing that it's more of a comment. I have a lot of questions, and I can follow up with Claude around this, just with the testing results as we're and the lessons learned. I think, as you've said, not many places are doing this. We started the pilot at the nursing homes, moved on to the homeless shelters, and have done specific neighborhoods. And I understand that some of the testing, it takes 5 days to get those results. But as we get those results, I'd love to, I know they'll be shared on the dashboard as the cases go up, but just what trends we're seeing and patterns we're seeing and how we're looking at that data. But that's just a general comment. I'd love to talk more with you, Claude, offline on that. So that concludes our special meeting, but we have one comment from
Madam Mayor, I
City
just
Manager.
want to say that we have confirmed that this is now on the CambridgeMA.gov COVID-19 website, this presentation. So if people certainly want to look at it over the weekend, and we'd be happy to talk about it again on Monday, but it is up on the website. Thank
So
you.
the presentation on shared streets that was shared today is on the website. I think we can all tweet it and share it as well for folks to give comment. So with that, on a motion to adjourn by Councillor Toomey, we will do a roll call.
On adjournment, Councillor Carlone.
Yes.
Yes. Vice Mayor Mallon.
Yes.
Yes. Councillor McGovern.
Yes.
Yes. Councillor Nolan.
Yes.
Yes. Councillor Simmons.
Yes.
Yes. Councillor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Councillor Toomey.
Yes.
Yes. Councillor Zondervan.
Yes.
Yes. Mayor Siddiqui.
Yes.
Motion passes 9 in favor, 0 against.
See you Monday. Bye.
Bye.